What if I told you that the most complex and tragic character in the entire Harry Potter series is also one of its most forgotten? As much as we all love Dobby, he wasn't the only house elf who helped bring down Voldemort. In fact, one of the most misunderstood and overlooked characters in the entire saga is Kreacher the House Elf. In the movies, he's portrayed as little more than a bitter, grouchy servant of the Black family. But in the books, his story is far more heartbreaking and far more important. Used, abused, and ultimately redeemed, Kreacher plays a quiet yet critical role throughout the final books of the series, and even leads the House Elves of Hogwarts into battle in the Deathly Hallows. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to Fact or Fantasy, where we explore the hidden lore behind both Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings. And in today's video, I'm going to uncover every dark, heart-wrenching, and heroic moment from Kreacher's life. And by the end, you might just walk away with a new favorite house elf. We meet Kreacher in the Order of the Phoenix as Harry goes to Grimmauld Place for the first time, and then he continues to pop up throughout the Half-Blood Prince and the Deathly Hallows. Similarly to Dobby, we read about him a lot more than the movie shows him, but unlike Dobby, he was not always a good-hearted being, and he has a redemptive character arc which takes him from betrayal to heroism. Kreacher's early life is unknown, as his exact date of birth and death aren't given to us. However, once in an offhand comment, J.K. Rowling mentioned that Kreacher died at the age of 666. Now, this could have been a joke, but if we take it literally, then that means he could have been hundreds of years old during the events of Harry Potter. We really only know about the Black family going back to the early 1800s though, so it's possible that Kreacher was born after that, since we know his ancestors also served the House of Black. And then he could have died hundreds of years after the events of Harry Potter. Regardless of his early life, we know that he loyally served Sirius's parents, Orion and Walburga Black, and this is where he adopted many of his pure blood beliefs. Out of his master's children, Regulus Black was his favorite, as Regulus showed more signs of following the pureblood traditions of his family than Sirius did. But unfortunately, the dark side of Regulus's life is what leads Kreacher into one of the darkest and most dangerous situations he would have to face. The 10th chapter of the Deathly Hallows is titled Kreacher's Tale, and reveals the unexpected story of this house elf's greatest misfortune. Around the year 1977, Regulus Black became a Death Eater at the age of 16 and began following Voldemort during his first rise to power. At this point, Sirius had already left home, and Kreacher was extremely loyal to the favorite son of his mistress. So a year later, when Regulus came to Kreacher with a task, the house elf was eager to comply. Of course, he had to do as Regulus ordered anyway due to the magical bond of a house elf, but still, it was an honor to be able to serve the Dark Lord. So what exactly was asked of him? Well, initially, there wasn't much information provided. Regulus came to him saying that the Dark Lord needed a house elf. He then told Kreacher to do the Dark Lord's bidding and then return home to him. So Kreacher went with Voldemort to what we now know is the Horcrux Cave. This is the location by the sea where Harry and Dumbledore find the fake locket, and we read that Kreacher was actually the one to help Voldemort hide this Horcrux all those years ago. But the way in which this happens is disturbingly cruel, but also fortunate, as it's the only hole in Voldemort's plan which he never expected. You see, Kreacher accompanied Voldemort into the cave and then was forced to drink the potion in which the locket was hidden. Just to give you an idea of the tragic nature of this event, here is what Kreacher says in the book as he describes it to Harry. So Kreacher went to the Dark Lord. The Dark Lord did not tell Kreacher what they were to do, but took Kreacher with him to a cave beside the sea. And beyond the cave there was a cavern, and in the cavern was a great black lake. There was a boat. There was a basin full of potion on the island. The Dark Lord made Kreacher drink it. Kreacher drank, and as he drank, he saw terrible things. Kreacher's insides burned. Kreacher cried for Master Regulus to save him. He cried for his mistress Black, but the Dark Lord only laughed. He made Kreacher drink all the potion, he dropped the locket into the empty basin, he filled it with more potion, and then the Dark Lord sailed away, leaving Kreacher on the island. This is one of the darkest moments in Kreacher's life. And it's not over yet, because obviously Kreacher doesn't die in the cavern like Voldemort wanted him to. So what happens? Remember how Regulus ordered him to do the Dark Lord's bidding and then return home? Well, that was a command, and therefore magically binding for a house elf. So Kreacher simply disapparated out of the cave. You see, Voldemort always underestimated those who he deemed below himself, and therefore he didn't take into account a house elf's power in his planning for the defense of the locket. While a regular wizard couldn't apparate in or out of the cave, Kreacher could. So after apparating back to Regulus, he told his young master the entire story. After all, Voldemort thought the elf would be dead, so he didn't forbid him to share what had happened. Once he had heard Kreacher's tale, Regulus became very worried and told Kreacher to stay hidden. An unknown amount of time later, Regulus came to Kreacher in the night, not seeming to be in his right mind, and he told Kreacher to take him to the cave. Kreacher knew how to get in the cave, he knew about the boat, he knew about the potion, and he took Regulus all the way to the center. And then the unthinkable happened. Instead of ordering Kreacher to drink the poison once again, Regulus gave his house elf instructions to swap the locket with a fake, and then return home and destroy the original. And then Regulus drank the poison. Kreacher was forced to helplessly watch his master as he went insane, and then he swapped the locket, and the last thing he saw was Regulus getting dragged down into the water. So now do you see what I mean by heartbreaking? Every time I read this part of the book, I want to tear up because it's just crazy to think about what this house elf went through. The first time he was forced to drink the potion and was left for dead. And then the second time he had to watch one of the only people in his life that he cared about drink the poison and die without being able to help them. But the shocking part is that this is only part one of his insane life, as Kreacher's role in the Harry Potter story doesn't stop here. In fact, while one would think that the house elf would despise Voldemort at this point, his mind has been so twisted that he attempts to end Harry's life. But later in this video, we'll see how Kreacher was ultimately redeemed by the end of the story. So what's next in Kreacher's life? What happens after this incident with Master Regulus in the locket? Well, the years go by and Kreacher is unable to share Regulus's true fate with anyone, including his mistress whom he loved dearly. Regulus is simply missing for all they know, and Kreacher tries and tries to dispose of the locket, but he cannot. Years later in 1985, Sirius's mother dies, and Kreacher continues to serve her portrait at Grimmauld Place. Then about another 10 years later, in the mid-90s, Sirius returns to his family home, which has now been abandoned for many years. Sirius never had a good relationship with his family, and therefore despises Kreacher. Kreacher returns the favor and begrudgingly serves Sirius, all the while muttering under his breath about how the older son of his mistress is a traitor. And unfortunately, this continued bitterness between them and Sirius's mistreatment of the house elf culminates in the finale of the Order of the Phoenix, as Harry goes on a wild goose chase inside the Department of Mysteries. Because if you didn't know, Kreacher plays a crucial role in tricking Harry into going to the Ministry and nearly losing his life. And in the process, Sirius Black dies due to this treachery on the part of Kreacher. In the book, after Harry has the dream of Sirius inside the Department of Mysteries, he attempts to call his godfather through the flute network, and Kreacher is the one who answers. After some pressing, the house elf gleefully says Master will not come back from the Department of Mysteries. And this is what convinces Harry that Sirius is there. But why would Kreacher say this? Obviously, Sirius wasn't actually there, which means that Kreacher had to have been in on Voldemort's plan. And he was. In fact, Kreacher was a spy for a long time before this. And we get the big reveal at the end of the Order of the Phoenix as Dumbledore talks with Harry and explains everything. Dumbledore tells Harry that Kreacher had been sneaking off and visiting none other than Bellatrix Lestrange and Narcissa Malfoy. The two former members of the Black family were the only ones Kreacher truly liked, and during Christmas, Sirius had said, quote, "Get out," which Kreacher took literally, giving himself permission to leave Grimmauld Place, which he normally wouldn't have been able to do. Now, Kreacher was not the secret keeper for the Order's location, and Sirius had ordered him to not share any of the crucial plans the Order had been making. So Kreacher was unable to feed the Malfoys direct information. But still, there were things that Sirius didn't deem important enough to ban Kreacher from sharing. Things like the fact that Sirius loved Harry, and Harry viewed his godfather as a father figure. Voldemort took advantage of this information, which had been fed to him over the months, and the Malfoys told Kreacher to simply keep Sirius occupied on the night of the dream that Harry had. So that very night, Kreacher had injured Buckbeak, which occupied Sirius, who was tending to the Hippogriff's wound at the time that Harry called through the flute network. Kreacher strategically intercepted the call and fed Harry the lie about Sirius at the Ministry, all without Sirius knowing. And Dumbledore explains that Kreacher was able to lie to Harry at the time because Harry wasn't his master, at least at that time. You see, that wraps up what I would call part 2 of Kreacher's life, which is still wrapped in darkness, coercion, and toxic abusive relationships for this house elf. But things start to look up in the final books of the Harry Potter series as Harry himself gains ownership of Kreacher. After Sirius's death, Harry inherited all that his godfather owned, which included the house elf. During the events of the Half-Blood Prince, Kreacher pops up here and there as Harry uses him and Dobby to spy on Draco Malfoy. This is another crucial element of the story which the movie left out, as the two house elves work together to figure out where Malfoy has been going when he sneaks off. Things are starting to warm up, but Kreacher is still reluctant and not a fan of Harry. He still refers to Hermione as a mudblood, and when he gives reports of Draco's activities to Harry, he talks about the Malfoy boy with reverence, as if he wishes nothing more than to serve the Malfoy family. But this doesn't last forever. In Chapter 10 of the Deathly Hallows, which I've already addressed, Kreacher shares the story of Master Regulus and the locket. And this emotional moment seems to finally break down the old elf. It's as if this massive weight has been dragging him down all these years, and finally sharing the fate of his beloved master has relieved him. It's also key to mention that Kreacher hates himself for not being able to accomplish Master Regulus's command about destroying the locket. So in his eyes, he's a failure. But the key turning point is really when Harry treats Kreacher with kindness and respect and regards Regulus as a hero. After hearing the story from Kreacher, Hermione explains to Harry that Regulus never explained to Kreacher how he switched sides before dying. So to Kreacher, his favorite master was still a Death Eater. She also explains how Sirius, the one on the good side, was mean and abusive to him, so why would the house elf like him or the Order? And Narcissa Malfoy and Bellatrix Lestrange were probably nice to him as he shared secrets with them about the Order. So, finally seeming to understand the tormented life that this house elf has led, thanks to Hermione, Harry gives Kreacher an order, but in a much softer and kinder tone. He says, "Kreacher, I want you, please, to go and find Mundungus Fletcher. We need to find out where the locket, or Master Regulus's locket, is. It's really important. We want to finish the work Master Regulus started. We want to, ensure that he didn't die in vain." Then, in an attempt to further reinforce this kindness, Harry offers the fake locket to Kreacher as a gift. This causes the house elf to fall on the floor crying, and it takes another half hour before he's able to get up and go on the mission to find Mundungus. And before he leaves, he bows to Harry and Ron twice and gives a slight spasm in Hermione's direction, which is an insane amount of improvement just from a simple gift and a kind tone from Harry. This key moment marks the redemptive arc in Kreacher, and we see that reflected throughout the rest of the book. In fact, every moment after this makes you love Kreacher more and more. For example, 3 days after this order to find Fletcher, Kreacher returned, and it must be said that Dobby isn't with him. Of course, the movie put the focus on the house elf we were most familiar with, but in the book, this is all Kreacher. But anyway, the greatest part about this is when Harry is interrogating Fletcher, and the man insults the Black family possessions by calling them junk. We read that in a flash, Kreacher had ran at Fletcher with a saucepan and began banging him over the head with it. Harry had to call him off, and after he does, Kreacher looks at his master and says, "Perhaps just one more, Master Harry, for luck?" This gets a laugh out of Ron, and Harry says that they need Fletcher's conscience, but if he refuses to talk, then Kreacher can get involved again. As the trio continue to live in Grimmauld Place, we learn more about the drastic changes in Kreacher's attitude, and I think it's best if I just read straight from the chapter here. It says, "The kitchen was almost unrecognizable. Every surface now shone. Copper pots and pans had been burnished to a rosy glow. The wooden tabletop gleamed. The goblets and plates already laid for dinner glinted in the light from a merrily blazing fire on which a cauldron was simmering. Nothing in the room, however, was more dramatically different than the house elf who now came hurrying toward Harry. Dressed in a snowy white towel, his ear hair as clean and fluffy as cotton wool, Regulus's locket bouncing on his thin chest." After this, we continue on to read about Kreacher's cooking and manners and how he had served them desserts and more, being essentially a completely different house elf than before. Now, as we know, Grimmauld Place gets compromised during the Deathly Hallows, and thankfully Kreacher escapes, but we don't hear from him for a while. Harry was unable to summon him, for fear that he had been captured by Voldemort and would accidentally lead the Dark Lord to them. Harry also feared that perhaps this change in demeanor hadn't been enough to make him disloyal to Voldemort. But as we'll soon see, Kreacher was all in on the good side by now, as that gift of Master Regulus's fake locket pretty much earned Harry a lifetime of servitude from the house elf. And so the last thing we read about Kreacher in the Harry Potter series comes at the end of the Deathly Hallows during the battle for Hogwarts. And it's one of the greatest parts of the entire battle. Here's what it says. "The house elves of Hogwarts swarmed into the entrance hall, screaming and waving carving knives and cleavers, and at their head, the locket of Regulus Black bouncing on his chest, was Kreacher, his bullfrog's voice audible even above this din. Fight, fight, fight for my master, defender of house elves. Fight the Dark Lord in the name of brave Regulus. Fight." They were hacking and stabbing at the ankles and shins of Death Eaters, their tiny faces alive with malice, and everywhere Harry looked, Death Eaters were folding under the sheer weight of numbers, overcome by spells, dragging arrows from wounds, stabbed in the leg by elves, or else simply attempting to escape but swallowed by the oncoming horde. This is an image I wish we would have had in the movies. A horde of house elves swarming the Death Eaters, all led by the least expected character of them all, would have been a sight to behold. Finally, we don't hear any more about Kreacher in the books, but rather in a live chat J.K. Rowling did many years ago, she mentioned that the house elf lived out his life in peace in Grimmauld Place, loyal to the Potters. And that is the story of Kreacher the House Elf. A story filled with hate, tragedy, abuse, yeah, but also a story filled with redemption, forgiveness, and heroism. And now that you've heard it all, I'd love to hear from you on what your favorite part of Kreacher's life was. And if you've never heard it before, how does this new information impact your perception of this grouchy house elf? As always, thank you to Jason, Cody, Joshua, and all of my other incredible Patreon supporters, as each month they continue to help make these videos possible. If you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe, and come back every Wednesday to explore the Wizarding world with me. Have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.